Yo, who's ready for a racing?
It's a bold claim, but I feel confident in saying that Asphalt 9 Legends is one of the most visually impressive mobile games ever released. I know, such a statement immediately invites criticism, and that's fair, but hear me out first. There's a lot of racing games on mobile platforms, but this presentation here is so strong in both technology and art design that it pushes beyond what you would expect to see in a mobile phone game. At its best, Asphalt 9 delivers a presentation that would be perfectly at home on a PlayStation 4 or an Xbox One. Today then, we're going to shine some light on what it takes to build a high-end mobile game like Asphalt 9. It's a space we don't often tackle on DF, but in discussing the game with one of its engineers, I've become fascinated with the unique challenges faced in creating such a game on a mobile phone. We'll also take a look at the game running on 3 different platforms, including an iPhone X, a high-end Android phone, and of course the Windows Store version running on a high-spec PC. So buckle up, buy some loot crates, and prepare for a rare look into the world of high-end mobile gaming. So, what is it that makes Asphalt 9 so impressive? Well, from the very first moment I was blown away by its fluid performance, beautiful visuals, and a rendering feature set rivaling a modern console game. There's plenty of great looking racers out there, of course, but Asphalt 9 takes a very different approach. For one thing, it's heavy on post-processing effects. I know, motion blur isn't universally loved, but I feel that it adds tremendously to the presentation here. Adding something like this comes at a significant cost as well. Beyond that, each and every track is packed with detail that stretches well off into the distance, along with some beautiful materials and lighting around every corner. Cars are also supremely detailed for a mobile game, with some models coming in at a polygon count exceeding 90,000 triangles. That's more detailed than certain current generation racing games. Now, beyond raw detail, some of the visual features on display include a full HDR rendering pipeline, high-performance soft particles, a pseudo PBR materials system, and loads of post-processing effects including per-pixel motion blur, crepuscular rays, screen space reflections, color grading, and more. Okay, so a list of features is great and all, but you might be wondering just what it is that powers all of this and what sort of design philosophy occurred along the way to allow it to become possible. This is not a console game after all. There are a lot of restrictions when building a mobile game that simply don't crop up in the console space. To begin with, all of this is powered by Gameloft Barcelona's in-house Jet engine, a super optimized toolset designed first and foremost for mobile platforms. Jet engine has been around for more than a decade now, evolving with each new installment in the series, but this feels like its most significant leap yet in terms of matching a proper console game, which has always been its goal. In creating Asphalt 9, the team has focused more heavily on complex PBR materials and an HDR lighting pipeline designed to run across all target devices. Taken together, we're left with a cohesive, richly detailed game, but as noted previously, this is a mobile game and thus there are a lot of limitations to consider here. Primarily, with such a wide range of handsets and tablets to deal with, the team had to design its features to function across each of them. With HDR lighting, for instance, an in-house texture encoding method was devised to keep overall file size low, while also functioning on devices that do not otherwise support HDR texture formats. According to one of the game's engineers, 2 of the main concerns when designing a high-performance mobile game are pixel cost and number of draw calls. These mobile GPUs are very capable when it comes to rendering a lot of geometry, but once you increase shader complexity and introduce more advanced post-processing effects into the mix, such as per-pixel motion blur, you can run into performance issues and thermal limitations. This can either mean rapid battery drain, which is a problem in the world of phone games where you want your phone to last all day, or throttling, where hitting a certain temperature threshold decreases clock speeds and thus performance. This also helps explain the importance of frame rate caps. Using an iPhone X, for instance, Asphalt 9 can easily hit 60 frames per second, but doing so massively decreases battery life and can result in thermal throttling. Thus, unlike a console game, you really can't afford to run full out. It's all a balancing act. You want to deliver the best performance possible without pushing the hardware too far. It's no easy task. Beyond that, when crafting a lot of the cool special effects, older hardware needs to be considered. If this game were exclusive to high-end iPhones, it might be possible to utilize things like compute shaders, but as it stands, it's important to maintain a reasonable number of rendering paths while targeting the widest audience. This isn't a huge team after all, so these things are really important during development. Alright, let's get back to the renderer here. Asphalt 9 primarily utilizes forward rendering, with certain effects like shadows being rendered off-screen, then merged into the scene, similar to a deferred lighting pass. Particles such as smoke and fire can also be rendered off-screen at a lower resolution to reduce the impact on performance. A trick similar to what we saw last generation, especially on PlayStation 3 where fill rate was heavily limited. I hadn't really given the choice of rendering path on a mobile device much thought, but in the case of Asphalt 9, forward rendering was the best choice, and this is for two reasons. For one thing, Asphalt 9 doesn't really use any sort of dynamic lighting, thus one of the main benefits of going with a deferred renderer isn't really useful here. Secondly, some of the supported devices by the game do not support multiple render targets, making it difficult to implement a deferred renderer. In the console space, this kind of thing isn't really an issue, but the need to support slower devices seems to have determined the direction the team needed to go in. Interesting stuff. So what does all this mean then for each platform? Well, on iOS, the team utilizes Apple's Metal 2 API since really that's the only option. It's fast and efficient, allowing the team to reduce the number of draw calls and lower overall temperatures. This is crucial to achieving fast performance on an iPhone. In the case of Android, however, Asphalt 9 utilizes OpenGL ES 3.0. Now, perhaps someday in the future we'll see an Android version utilizing Vulkan, but for now, we're still on OpenGL, and there are some additional limitations as a result. On Windows 10 then, this is still a DX11 based renderer, which was ported by a separate team. So, how does this translate into actual performance then? Well, the iPhone 10 version is perhaps the most accomplished of the bunch, delivering a mostly steady 30 frames per second during races. Using the HDMI adapter, I did notice some additional frame pacing errors which show up in our frame rate analysis, but in practice, the motion blur helps minimize this and it's really difficult to see on the smaller phone screen itself. The game manages to feel rather fluid overall, despite these frame time inconsistencies that pop up during a race. Now, over on Android, it's a different story. Technically speaking, the Galaxy S9 Plus is a very capable phone. Its specs aren't quite as strong as the iPhone X on paper, but it's close enough. Unfortunately, the issues that we mentioned on the iPhone version are magnified here when running on the S9, and there are two of them: frame persistence and the actual frame rate. Like the iPhone, there are frame pacing issues that crop up here during gameplay. This is one of those things that seems to impact a lot of mobile games, but on this phone, the impact is a lot greater with more noticeable and frequent stalls in performance. It just doesn't feel as fluid. The other issue is that the frame rate can actually drop below 30 frames per second. It's just a touch under 30, but it's noticeable. The slowdown we encountered here combined with frame persistence issues simply leads to a game that feels jerkier overall. This is all using the game's default settings, by the way. On the Galaxy S9, it's also possible to select from 3 different visual presets: a performance mode, the default option, and a high quality mode. Performance mode reduces visual quality by removing things such as motion blur and lowering the overall resolution. This mode exhibits the same noticeable frame pacing issues as default, but it does at least seem to avoid actual drops below 30 frames per second, so it's a little bit smoother. I wouldn't use it though since it loses motion blur. This is more for lower end phones, I'd imagine. The high quality mode in comparison shares more with the default mode, only with a slightly increased resolution, suggesting that the real bottleneck is elsewhere since we still see similar issues as default. So what's going on here? Well, there's a lot of very capable Android devices out there, but there seems to be more bottlenecks to contend with. The combination of slower drivers, slower memory, and more overhead from the operating system can be enough to cause issues in high-performance games. Now, something like the S9 Plus can power through it well enough, but slightly older phones may exhibit more issues in games like this. In terms of visual quality then, the S9 and iPhone X both offer the highest quality rendering options made available by the game, and as you can see, they stack up well against one another. The iPhone version is locked to a specific preset of course, whereas the Android version allows you to choose from those three aforementioned settings. It is possible to raise the resolution on the S9 of course, but neither phone seems to quite reach the native resolution of their respective displays. So how does it look on a larger screen then? Well, that's where the PC version comes in, and this makes for an interesting point of comparison. Basically, Asphalt 9 is a game designed for mobile platforms, and of course that includes mobile PCs, but it also takes reasonable advantage of more powerful PCs, and it looks great while doing it. I'm genuinely surprised by how well the game holds up when viewed on a large screen. It supports ultra-wide output, 60 frames per second, and various other graphical options. And if you play it with a gamepad, it feels great, certainly better than a touchscreen. Really, at this point, I feel pretty good about the game overall. The handling is fun and arcadey, especially with a pad. The visuals are beautiful, and there's a lot of content to enjoy without needing to spend anything on microtransactions. This is, of course, perhaps my biggest nitpick with any mobile game, including Asphalt 9, microtransactions. While there is plenty of content to enjoy without them, the game is not shy about popping up various packs of cards and other things like that to encourage you to spend some money. Now, I understand that this is the reality of modern mobile business, but it does kind of detract from the game. Thus, what I'd really like to see is a proper port of the game to something like the Nintendo Switch, but without any of the microtransactions. A fully featured version with some new or expanded tracks would be awesome. Looking over the library on Switch, Asphalt 9 holds up really well against the best looking racers on the system. Of course it lacks the 60 FPS of those games, but again, I think it holds up very well overall. And honestly, it wouldn't even be a stretch to see it on a console. After all, the series has a history on such platforms, and the original Asphalt was released on Nintendo DS more than a decade ago. This is the type of game that we could really use once again on consoles. So that's really it then. Asphalt 9 is one of the first mobile games in a long time that caused me to sit up and take notice. It offers a level of visual quality you just don't expect from a mobile platform, and it plays great to boot. And really, it's nice to peek at what's happening in the mobile space from time to time, since we're so wrapped up in console and PC specific games most of the time. We were really impressed with Fortnite earlier this year from Epic Games, and are even more impressed by what Gameloft has achieved here. Asphalt 9 is just a beautiful game. But that's all for now. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to like, subscribe, ring the bell for notifications, and perhaps even follow us over on Twitter. And until next time, this is John signing off.